totally appropriate. What you all have to deal with coming here should put you in the right mood for these books and these authors. Our goal here with this series of conversations is to better get to know some of the talented authors who live right here in the Bow Valley, learn about their projects, see how their ideas get from their heads onto the page and then into your hands. Before I start, yes, thank you to Save on Foods, but also thank you to Chris and Carl. That food doesn't walk over here by itself. That's Chris and Carl up here. They make the effort to deliver and set it up. Thank you too to the library, the friends of the library, and to all of you for being here this evening. Quick comment on how things are going to go, just so you can plan yourselves, is as follows. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for each of our writers tonight, and then they will each give us their best elevator pitch, their brief, what is my book about spiel, after which I will dive in, ask some questions, and we'll have a chance to hear each of them read a small selection from their books, and at the end of the evening there will be time for a few questions as well from you, so hold your questions till the end, we will get there. The library is very generous about not kicking us out immediately at the end of the evening, so please take advantage of Cafe Books, our fabulous independent local bookseller here, who has, actually Jen walked over with a trolley full of books for you that I think she would rather not trolley back again, so please come shop and see what she has on offer there at the end of the evening, and the authors will be around to do signings and chat as well. Both of our featured authors tonight will be no strangers to those of you here in the room tonight. And they both write about many things, including adventure, challenges of all sorts, mountain culture, and they are both masters at wrangling big stories into very readable books. I'm going to start with you, Sharon, who is the author of Rising. Would you like to hold your book up there? Thank you. Sharon Wood made history in 1986 when she became the first woman from North America to climb Mount Everest. Her team accomplished their ascent without Sherpa assistance via a new variation of the seldom climbed and difficult West Ridge. Her team's story of their epic ascent catapulted Sharon into an accidental career as an inspirational speaker. She's a certified ACMG mountain guide with nearly 5 decades of experience climbing, guiding throughout the mountain ranges of the world. So Sharon, give us your best elevator pitch here. What is your book all about?
Hi everyone. Nice to see everyone from my Pilates class. All my friends. Familiar faces. Yeah, I don't have an elevator speech and I dither over it every time, so I'm sorry, I don't. You've pretty much told everybody what the book is about. I usually start out, or I've been told to start out with, in 1986, I became the first woman from the Americas to climb Mount Everest and the first to climb the West Ridge, which wasn't difficult because there were only 13 people who have. But isn't that just the biggest boast you've ever heard? And yes, indeed, that did catapult me into an accidental career. So this book is my memoir of about a 20-year stretch of time. And part one is my journey up the mountain with a remarkable cast of characters, my teammates, even a bad boyfriend, mentors and friends. And there's really nothing remarkable about climbing Mount Everest these days, but back in the day, I think what was remarkable was our team effort and our success despite some pretty bad odds. And part two is about life in Everest's long shadow. Much to my surprise, I was daunted and challenged by the notoriety, even though it was relatively small, but for me as an introvert, it was very big. And my evolution in terms of how I viewed relationships as becoming the most important thing in life that fulfills.
Perfect, thank you. Bernadette McDonald is the author of Alpine Rising. Bernadette has authored 13 books, won numerous awards, including 2 Boardman Tasker Prizes, the Banff Mountain Book Festival Grand Prize, 2 National Outdoor Book Awards, and various others. In 2011, the American Alpine Club awarded her their highest literary honor for excellence in mountain literature. She was a founding vice president of mountain culture at the Banff Center and director of the Banff Mountain Festivals for 20 years. She's an honorary member of the Himalayan Club, the Polish Mountaineering Association, and is a fellow of the Explorers Club. When she's not writing, which you'd be amazed she's actually got any spare time with all of that going on, she likes to climb, hike, ski, paddle, and grows grapes. We'll hear more about that, I think, a bit later. But Bernadette, what is your book about?
Okay, so this is what it looks. Oh,
Yes.
this is what it looks like, and what is it about? Alpine Rising is about climbers from Pakistan and Nepal, primarily, who work in the highest mountains on this planet. So they climb and carry loads and do all kinds of things in the Himalaya and the Karakoram. And they work primarily for foreign expeditions who come to those mountains. And this book is kind of a study of how things have changed for those local climbers from back in the early 1900s when they first started working for foreign expeditions coming from Britain and France, Germany, and various other countries. At that time, they were very underpaid, they were under-equipped, they were under-acknowledged, under everything, really. And this book is kind of an exploration of their evolution from that period of time till now, where many of those local climbers are successful entrepreneurs, they're internationally qualified guides, many of them are famous, and many of them are not. And it's really an exploration of that evolution and how it has affected climbers from Nepal and how and Pakistan and the differences between those two countries. And I think I would add as well that the book was inspired by one climber. In the process of writing another book, I was writing about climbing 8,000 meter peaks in winter, and one of the people who I got to know was Ali Sadpara, who was a Pakistani climber, probably the most famous Pakistani climber for a number of years. And my takeaway from getting to know him is that he was extremely accomplished, a very fine human being, and completely under-acknowledged in the world outside of Pakistan. And it was Ali who inspired me to write this book.
Thank you. I'm Nikki Tate. I've been around the Bow Valley on and off since 1969. I have written a few books, but I am so inspired by reading the works of other writers. It's one of the great joys of my life. So I'm delighted to be sharing that passion with you here this evening. You've led into this a little bit. I know that you have written other biographies, often because the subjects did not want to be bothered to write the stories themselves for whatever reason. So the impetus for writing Alpine Rising, it began with this meeting with Ali. What took you from that conversation, or how did that evolve? How did you actually wind up jumping into a massive project like this?
Yeah, I asked myself that question many, many times in the last 5 years. So the process of getting to know Ali and his story, and in particular, it was his ascent of Nanga Parbat in winter. It was the first winter ascent of Nanga Parbat, and he was part of an international team. He wasn't being hired as a worker on the mountains. He was actually a team member. And I saw them in action on stages, at festivals, this kind of thing. And yet, even though he was an equal member of the team, and in fact, what I heard over and over again is that he was the workhorse on the team. He wasn't getting the acknowledgement I thought that he deserved. And so I thought, well, maybe this is just a one-off. It's his personality. He's pretty kind of easygoing fellow, humble. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was worth looking into. Is this just Ali Satpara, or is it a pattern? And of course, it doesn't take long to start reading and rereading books, reports, Alpine Club journals, going back, and of course I kept going back further and further, and the further back I went, the clearer it became that local climbers they just didn't get any appreciation. Often they were unnamed, and they were certainly underpaid. They had no training, their equipment was terrible. And as time went on, things of course changed, but I was curious about what caused all those changes, so I guess that's how it happened.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sharon, so you were the first North American woman to great acclaim at the time to stand atop Mount Everest, but your book about this experience took some time to appear in the world, some 30 years later. It wasn't like people didn't want to hear your story, so tell me, why did it take so long for you to get around to writing this book, and what was the impetus in the end to have this finally put your words on paper and get the book out there?
Well, that's how long it took me to write, or learn to write. It is so true.
Not true.
It is.
Not.
That's one of the reasons, and another was I felt dogged by Mount Everest for years, and I know I shouldn't say that, and I sound like a spoiled brat. It's definitely a first world problem, but Everest would always precede me into a room, and a day wouldn't go by without Everest being mentioned in one way or another. And so between telling the story for a living in a timeline of 15 minutes to an hour over 1,500 times, and having this mountain in my life every day, I thought, well, if I just get the whole story out once and for all, it might just go away. and yeah, it was just, sometimes you can't really explain why you write a book. For me, it was something that I just could not do. So I felt compelled to keep picking up the pen and keep picking myself up after one failure after another to do it.
And I'm very glad you did. It's a wonderful book. If you have not yet read it, get on it. There are some copies over here. You're missing out on a real treat. Bernadette, your process for gathering information, whether you're writing a collection of stories or an in-depth biography of a particular individual, it involves a lot of interviewing. For Alpine Rising, you wrote a lot of this during the pandemic. You couldn't exactly hop on a plane, go have tea, ask your questions. How on earth did you get around this challenge of gathering the information, doing the interviews, and getting this book done?
Yes, the normal process, of course, writing a biography or writing a history of any group of climbers is to go to them and talk to them, sit in their kitchens, have tea or whatever they're serving, go out in the mountains with them and just talk and listen and learn their stories, learn what makes them tick. COVID did hit just as this book sort of began, and at first we kind of thought, okay, well, it was a great idea, you know, COVID will be over in a couple of months, we'll just wait. But of course that didn't happen. So we had to go to Plan B, which turned out to be Plan A+, I think, in retrospect. I was very lucky through a series of acquaintances and friends and basically a network to have two partners, one in Pakistan and one in Nepal. In Nepal, it was Serena Rai, a young woman who works for the Himalayan database. And I don't know if many of you remember Elizabeth Hawley, who used to run the Himalayan database. Well, Serena is one of the 4 people who took over for Elizabeth Hawley when she died. So Serena knows the climbing community in Nepal. She knew all of the people that I wanted to interview, and she knew many more that I had never heard of. So that was an A+ from my perspective. And in Pakistan, my partner was Saklan Sapara, who is somewhere in this room. Saklan, where are you? Aha, there he is. So Saklan also knows the climbing community in Pakistan and was from Satpara village, which is a hotbed of climbing in Pakistan. And so again, he knew all of the climbers that I wanted to interview, and he knew many more that I'd never heard of, which was A+ bonus. And so the 3 of us worked together with figuring out who we should interview, how we should do it, what we should ask, and these 2 partners made this book possible.
So just to really drill down into this, was this by Zoom or emails, or how did you communicate amongst yourselves, and how was this information all shared?
Well, we communicated in all kinds of different ways, but Serena and Saklan did their work in person, either traveling to villages. Saklan in particular traveled to a number of villages, and Serena did most of her work in Kathmandu, although not all of it. So they interviewed, well, first of all, we figured out what was going to be asked to which people. They did the interviews in whatever language was most appropriate for that person, and there were several languages that were used. They recorded them, transcribed them, and translated them for me. So it was a big job.
Holy smokes, what a collaboration. Talk about teamwork and cooperation.
It was really a great teamwork.
Yeah, amazing. So Sharon, it's just as difficult to travel geographically and collect information from far-flung places as it is to travel through time. So you, in this book, the sections on Everest are written in the first person, meaning I, in the present tense, am standing in the tent, or I'm chatting with Jane, or I'm doing this and that. It's very vivid, and immediate, but it took place 30 years ago. Do you have some sort of superpower memory going on there? Did you keep journals? How did you recreate this so effectively to take us into those scenes?
Yeah, good question. I kept journals. I had a lot of conversations with my teammates. I ran my manuscript by, and a lot of the scenes by some of my teammates, just to see if I had it right. But one of the reasons, or the main reason that it was in first person, present tense, is because I could put myself in that space. I could imagine myself very easily speaking to that person again, and their mannerisms and their quirks. And that was super fun. And I did a lot of dialogue for that reason, because the thing that I could bring up the easiest was the dialogue and the way they spoke. But another, something I said to Bernadette today, as we were both dithering about what we were going to say tonight over the phone, I said, gosh, you know, writing biography has got to be way harder than writing your own story, because you don't have that license, that, what did we call it, literary, that creative license. You can't lie, and I can. So, I'll think so.
Depends if the subject is alive or not. Well, actually, to follow up on that, so how effectively can you lie? You said that you shared your manuscript and discussed these scenes with your fellow climbers. Did you have any arguments over what actually happened up there, or who said what? Or
absolutely, yes. Because some of you will know this from being at altitude with people, but you have, or even down here, something that happened 10 years ago. That conversation, you may remember it very differently from the person who, or what that person said to you, very differently from what the person thinks they said to you. So that's super interesting, but I really tried to get the gist of it. And for sure that some of the dialogues weren't verbatim, but what I did have as well were all the transcripts for the radio calls. One of our members had written down and had recorded all the transcripts, which was really handy.
That would have been incredibly helpful to, also I would think, pinpointing the timelines and so on, which are very accurately captured in the book, what was happening when.
I'm glad it looks that way.
Well, you pulled the wool over my eyes, I totally believed it.
No, truly, I didn't set out, I don't think I lied, I just think sometimes we do have a different perspective, and yeah, it was tough.
Absolutely, and even when you remember the gist of the conversation correctly, you're never quite sure how it lands with the other person and how that's interpreted. And there are a number of conversations in here where, particularly between you and Jane, who is the camp cook and support person, sort of trying to understand the ways in which other people are behaving and what they're saying and interpreting it. That's a whole other level of complexity when you're with a group of people in a high-stress situation. Bernadette, back over to you here. The introduction in the book is called One Summit, 2 Centuries. You've touched on this a little bit already, but I want you to dig in a little bit deeper. It describes 2 very different ascents of K2, one in 1954, one in 2021. The contrast between those 2 climbs, it's extraordinary, and it sort of sets the stage for all the many other stories that are embedded in the book. Tell us just in a nutshell what happened in those 2 climbs, why they were so different, and why you chose to open the book there.
So both climbs took place on K2. 1954 was the first ascent. It was an Italian expedition, big expedition, and they hired a number of Pakistani climbers to help them. Among them was Amir Mehdi, who was the unfortunate choice of Walter Bonatti to carry oxygen up to the 2 summit climbers, both Italian of course, who were bivouacked at a high camp just over 8,000 meters. And Walter Bonatti and Amir Mehdi were supposed to carry up oxygen bottles to these guys, and as a result, Amir Mehdi and Walter Bonatti spent the night just in an open-air bivouac, and Amir lost all of his toes and a good part of one of his feet. The Italians, of course, became celebrated heroes in their country. Walter Bonatti became one of the most famous mountaineers of all time, and Amir Mehdi just went home to his home in Shimshal and couldn't work, basically was unemployed for the rest of his life. That was a horrible situation, and it was kind of typical of what took place quite frequently at that time in climbing history. And I wanted to, the reason I had the other climb in the introduction is that when the first winter ascent of K2 took place, well, first of all, there were an amazing number of climbers trying to get the first winter ascent of K2. There were 60-some climbers at base camp. And they were from all over the world. They were foreign climbers, very experienced, some were very wealthy, some were guided. And there were these 10 Nepali climbers who managed to get the prize. And in the process of doing so, first of all, they did it very quickly. They arrived, there was a little bit of bad weather, but they basically laced the mountain with fixed ropes, and they just climbed it, and singing their national anthem as they made it the last few steps to the summit. And it was such a show of independence and power and taking control of their own destiny, in such a contrast to what had happened to poor Amir Mehdi all those years before. And I think it does set the stage for a huge transition that took place over many, many years, and that's why I used those 2.
Yeah, and it really does set the stage for the stories that come and puts them in context. It was also a nice relief to begin at the end to know that there was change coming, because it's some heavy going in this book, some incredibly painful, sad stories to read. So it's nice to know that things are changing. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Sharon, your book, as you said, the first part begins with and covers in lots of detail, by the way, if you just really want a rollicking, good mountain adventure story, beautifully told. That's the Everest piece. But even as you're telling that climbing story, I had the real sense that bagging the summit wasn't really the point, even though that's what everybody talks about. You got up there after all. But in terms of the expedition, I kept hearing over and over again, it was the teamwork, the cooperation, the mutual support, the relationships that were most important as you were going through this process. Can you give us an example or two? What does that even mean when you're up there? What does that teamwork really look like?
That teamwork looked like, well, what will, I have to start with saying that this was a very different era than it is now. I would call this the commercialized era in the Himalayas, would you? Mm-hmm. And I would say the era that we climbed it in has been called the adventure era. How about that? Is that accurate, Steve? You know, where people were trying to climb the mountain by different routes, by more difficult routes, and in better style with fewer resources. And they were relying more on their skill and their strategy than they were a lot of big guns. So anyway, that said, we climbed the route without Sherpa assistance. And so we worked in 3 shifts, 3 teams. And one team would be out front setting the ropes, one team would be carrying the loads, and one team would be resting all on the same day. And you would work 7 days out of 10, or 8 days out of 10. And if you couldn't carry that load for any reason, someone from another one of those teams would step in just like that. And you have to think interdependently. Or we had to on that mountain. No one could save themselves, right, for the summit, which would have been a great thing to do, but instead we all worked our butts off, and there were some very noble events, such as 4 of us ended up in the end being, we were more or less the last people standing, Barry Blanchard, Albie Soul, Dwayne Congdon, and myself as the 2 summit teams. And there was an American team on the mountain at the same time, trying to get the first, one of the ideas was to get the first American woman to the top of the mountain. And so Barry had traded places with me so that I could go on the first summit bid team and we could make a first for a change. Barry made a tremendous number of sacrifices in terms of trying to get us up there. And there were sacrifices all through the expedition of people stepping in for others, just to keep the machine going.
Yeah, it's very moving actually when you read the account of this cooperation, the support. It was 12 climbers who set up, right? 12, 13? 12.
There were 13 of us and
initially.
With 2 support members.
Right, okay. And of those 13, when you begin, you didn't know who was going to make the summit. And one never knows how you're going to handle altitude, injuries, all the many things that can go sideways. So by the time you get up to the top there, the 4 of you, that was a tremendous sacrifice on Barry's part, beautifully handled in here. Did you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I think that's the difference between this era and the previous eras. You were considered successful if you got anybody on the team to the top. Mm. And so it was more all about us than all about me, which has a very different flavor on a team or in a group.
on this matter of how things are changing and evolving, Bernadette, I'm going to go back over to you. If we broadly divide climbers into two groups, those who live in the region and those who don't, do you want to reflect on the differences between approaches and motivation? And you've already suggested where we might go with this section of the conversation. Between those two groups in terms of getting to the top of 8,000 meter peaks?
Well, I mean, that is a moving target for sure. The answer to that question is moving. But I think in the most general sense, you can say that for the people who live in Nepal and Pakistan, and who work in the mountains and on the mountains, the primary goal, the main motivation is to earn money. That's their job. And most of the people that I had any contact with had, questioned in any way the reason, the main reason they wanted to earn money was to educate their kids so that in the future they wouldn't have to do what they were doing. So it's a pretty straightforward reason for climbing. And for foreigners coming to the highest mountains on earth, it's not to earn money. It might be to get a better sponsor or to do something like that to raise your profile. But I think in a general sense, it's your own personal goal. Now, as I say, that is changing slowly. There are more and more climbers from Pakistan and Nepal who are climbing independently, who are doing trips for themselves, and they aren't being paid to do that. But still, overwhelmingly, it's a job.
Okay. And over time, if you look at the people who are coming into the region to climb, and you have interviewed at length many climbers from elsewhere who have done big peaks, has your opinion changed about those people who come from outside the region to climb?
Well, yeah, it has changed a lot. I mean, I think it depends a lot which mountains you're talking about. But if we're talking about the 8,000ers, particularly if we're talking about the sort of the more normal routes, I mean, not necessarily just one route, but say 2 or 3 relatively normal routes on a mountain, the vast majority of people who are coming to those mountains now would be maybe more accurately described as clients. They might be climbers, they might not be climbers, but they are going as a client to be guided in some way or supported in some way by local climbers, whether they're Pakistani or Nepali climbers. If you leave the 8,000ers, it's a little different story. And Steve Swenson is the perfect example of that. You go to the 7,000 meter peaks, there's all kinds of stuff that people have never climbed or routes that have never been done. And that's really, I guess you could say, where the exciting stuff is happening with climbers, not clients.
Got it. And actually, I'm going to ask a similar question of you. And again, this is how a really great example of how things are changing. So there's a moment early in your narrative. You have not yet reached base camp even, so you're still traveling in vehicles, and you've reached a river, and the Tibetan workers have jumped out to build a bridge across the river by throwing rocks in and so on. And there's a really interesting moment where you're watching and you just exchange a look with one of the men, and to yourself defensively you say, "We are climbers here for a good reason, not tourists." Which I thought was a really interesting observation about your own sense of being there. But these days, that line really feels like it's blurring, that you no longer have to be a climber to get up to a significant peak. Where do you draw the line between climber and tourist?
Well, Nikki, let me just go back to that scene for a minute, because I remember feeling incredibly uncomfortable sitting on my nice soft seat, watching these Tibetan laborers with water wicking up to their chests, moving boulders around and chopping ice. And as we sat in the car for hours, the jeeps, and then I would say my illusion of being any more important than a tourist had dissolved because I was feeling embarrassed about that, very uncomfortable. And then Bernadette's book did me no favors at all. When I read that, I found it really disrupting because I felt, oh my God, how self-indulgent are we as Westerners to go over to these big mountains, hire people to take the hit for us, not just carry our loads, but to take the hit of the risk of going, let's say, through the Khumbu Icefall time and time again, where the client, or what do they call them now, team members, don't they? Yes, goes through once or twice.
Yeah.
So I think it's unconscionable. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did not hire Sherpas for our own gains.
So, and I know this is difficult territory for a lot of us in this room. These are contentious issues, but I'm going to ask you, Bernadette, does it matter if they're climbers or tourists? I mean, business is booming. There's been a lot of financial benefits to the region. Do you think the risks for the locals are worth, are the benefits worth the risks to the locals who provide all this support to the visitors?
Well, sorry, it's not really for me to say. I mean, it's clearly worth it for the locals. So I guess it must be worth it. I mean, it's the business is booming. You're absolutely right. Business is booming in Nepal and it's booming in Pakistan. It was going to boom regardless of who was going to be making the money. At this point, it's mostly locals actually who are making the money, which I think is a good thing. They're still taking the risks. They're taking all of the risks. They're doing everything they can to mitigate those risks. But obviously they're still taking risks because accidents still happen and people are still dying. I'm sure that the families, when something happens, probably look back and think that it wasn't worth the risk, but those decisions are being made on a daily basis, and people are flocking to work in the mountains because the pay is much better than most of the other alternatives.
Yeah. Let's shift gears here a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, yes, please. But sorry, Sharon, this is back over to you, and this is a bit of an awkward question, I think. Not that the previous ones weren't, but I want to talk a little bit about fame versus the introvert. You've made it quite clear you were not hungry for all this attention that you received when you got back. And there were relentless demands from the media, speaking engagements, your status as the first woman to stand, North American woman on the mountain. Tell us what it was like to find yourself coming back, the center of attention. Why was it so hard for you to adjust to this re-entry?
Well, I guess I was like a deer in the headlights. And one of the big conflicts I had was that our whole team made this success, made this happen. And how in this culture it all lands on one person, that we're so hero hungry that the rest of our team doesn't get the kind of credit and attention that I was getting was extremely uncomfortable.
After all this time, have you come to terms with the fame piece? You still walk into a room and we still say, oh, Sharon would Everest. Like it's become part of your name, your identity.
Well, I kind of thought it went away. As I get older, I'm more cleverly disguised. And I did just become a grandmother. And I guess, if I'm doing anything right as I get older, I'm trying to become less self-conscious and just more accepting of what is. Yeah.
Bernadette, I have a confession when I was reading your book, I was quite surprised at the profound difference between Pakistan and Nepal. Can you give us a little bit more insight there? Why these two groups of local climbers, same big mountains, but very different experiences, in differences in the way they're perceived, treated, and then the impact in turn that's had on their respective communities?
Well, it's a very big, complicated question, and obviously the answer is at least as complicated, but there are a couple of things that do stand out, I think, that help explain the differences. I think more foreigners have been going to the mountains in Nepal over the years, and as a result, there has been a lot of interest in Nepali climbers, in particular Sherpas, because that's who many foreign climbers have hired. And as a result, there has been a lot of financial support that has sort of flowed into the Nepali climbing region, particularly in the Khumbu region, and that has manifested itself into training programs. And the training programs have made a huge difference for Nepali climbers. It has made them more equipped to climb, it has made them better equipped to guide and to rescue people, and to eventually take control of their own destinies, start their own companies. So as a result, the situation for many, not all, but many Nepali climbers is actually quite positive. That has not happened in Pakistan. A lot of the guiding that takes place in Pakistan is still done by Nepali climbers, in fact. Not completely, but a lot of the companies that are coming into Pakistan are coming from Nepal. And part of that reason, I think, is that the training programs still do not exist in a really sophisticated way in Pakistan. It's starting, and it's happening in various villages, but there isn't sort of like a national training program where Pakistani climbers can learn all the skills that they need. And as a result, their work is not being rewarded in the same way. I think I think training is a huge thing. And the other thing, which is possibly even more important, is education. When Sir Edmund Hillary climbed Everest, he devoted a good part of his life to building schools in Nepal, in remote regions. And that made a difference. And that hasn't, on a grand scale, that has not happened in Pakistan. And so the educational levels aren't the same. And both of those things contribute. And they're not the only things, but they do contribute.
Yeah, it is a big, complicated issue, which is touched on, actually not just touched on, I found it very enlightening and very helpful to understand better the region and the vast differences out there. How is everyone doing? Shall we barrel through here and keep going and save the snacking and chatting for the end? Are you all okay? Okay. Otherwise, it's very difficult to wrangle you all back into your seats. So we're going to keep going then. And I think now would be a perfect time to hear some sample readings from both of these authors. So Sharon, why don't you give us a taste of your book, please?
Okay. Well, I was going to say, Bernadette, how about you go first? Yeah, I know she did. I know.
She's running.
All right. Oh, yeah. Well, we were arguing there, so they
You didn't want to do that with the mic.
I can't read the print in my book, it's so small. And I've abridged this a little bit. So I'm going to give you some context here. I'm going to take you to our final push. I am with my summit bid partner, Dwayne Clongdon, and we have Kevin and Barry with us, Kevin Doyle and Barry Blanchard, an all-star team who are determined to help us carry up to the highest camp through horrendous winds. And we're on the last day of this push. We're going from 73 300 meters to 8,100 meters in this day. And so I'll begin the reading. We climb one behind the other with what we estimate to be 70-pound packs each on our backs. Glimpses of the boys ahead of me wash in and out of view between gossamer sheets of snow. Spindrift avalanches pour down the face, streaming off our hoods and shoulders. Shrouded in 3 layers of one-piece suits, hoods cinched and faces covered with balaclavas, masks and goggles, I feel like I'm in my own cocoon. My sole focus is on the next step in front of me. Each shove from a gust and each jolt from a slip exacts a cost I cannot afford. Calm is the only way through, but I know we are moving too slowly. All it will take to turn us around is for one of us to say, they've had enough. I'm convinced we'll turn around once we reach the end of the ropes. I'm sure of it. I am in the lead when I hear Jane's voice waft up from our radio inside my jacket. We've spotted them. We can see 2, no 3, coming out of the rocks onto the face, she says. I halt to pull the radio out and the boys and I huddle around it and I croak into the radio. We can hear you guys. They cheer. Jim, our leader, says, how's it going up there? We look at each other and I hand the radio to Dwayne. He slips his mask off and says, slow, but it sounds like you guys think we're getting somewhere. You guys are doing it, Jim rasps. Other voices come on and I soon realize that they have divided into 3 different viewing parties at different vantage points, thousands of meters below. They are watching us. They are with us. That is all I need to know. And I step away and lean my load against the slope to ease the strain on my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I bring my head up to take a look at the world beyond my feet. The sight of Dwayne, Barry, and Kevin bent over the radio, their faces lighting up as they listen to our teammates, lifts me out of myself. I marvel at the difference in our perspectives. Ours has been a plod from foot to foot. Theirs is they are convinced we're going for it. Our teammates transform what feels like an exercise in futility into progress. At well above 7,900 meters now, I lean back and look out from higher than I ever have before. Barry and I are the first to reach the end of our fixed ropes near the Hornbein Couloir, or just below it at 8,000 meters. We shrug out of our packs for the first time that day and clip them into the anchor, and I peer up the route into a deep gash that cleaves the north face. Surges of flotsam spurt out the bottom, dispersing into peppered spray that whistles by our heads. I think of Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold, who pioneered this route guided by a single black and white photo. They must have stood close to this same spot we are now, looking up at the very same site. I remember reading Tom's first impressions. The prospect of entering the gully was too much like becoming 10 pins in a high-angle bowling alley. I lower my head, force my thoughts away from what lies above, where we're going next, and bend into the task of unraveling a spool of rope into usable portions for the next day. Grateful for the distraction, I wrestle the kinks and tangles into coils while Barry turns the spool. Suddenly he shouts, drops the spool, and flattens himself against the face beneath his pack. Trapped in my sluggishness, I freeze in confusion. Then over the roar of the wind, I hear the telltale sharp cracks of rockfall, as startling as gunshots. A flush of adrenaline snaps my head up as I see a barrage of rocks the size of basketballs barreling down the couloir. The rocks explode against the walls and are heading straight for us. There's nowhere to hide. I grab Barry, or he grabs me, and I tuck in beside and beneath our hanging packs. My body flinches as the rocks thud into the face. Nearby, I watch them hit, bounce, fly, and vanish along with countless irretrievable heartbeats into the abyss below. Numbed and spent, We say nothing and resume our task. Minutes later, Dwayne and Kevin pull in. Dwayne, calm and unaware of what happened minutes before, says, "Well, what are we waiting for?" Between a brief glance, Barry and I opt not to tell them about the near miss. Then Barry says, "Right then." He hefts his pack onto his back, unclips from the last anchor, and starts up.
Thank you, and let me just say, it's really good to have you here. Bernadette, over to you.
All right, so when I'm writing a book about any group of people, group of climbers, I'm also interested in the support team, the spouses, the families, the people who make those climbers able to go up into the mountains every day. And this reading is about one of those support people. Fura Diki felt as if her life was collapsing. When her father, Ang Nima, the famous icefall doctor, died of cancer in 2013, she rushed to Dingboche, the tiny Sherpa village located at 4,358 meters in the upper Chukung Valley of Nepal. She needed to be there in time for the puja ceremony. Her husband Mingma joined her, but he was soon leaving for Everest Base Camp, where he was scheduled to work in the Khumbu icefall. Like his late father-in-law, Mingma's job was to install ladders and fixed lines in the treacherous jumble of ice. At 1 p.m. on the day of the puja, Mingma left for Everest. He called me from base camp at 5 p.m. to tell me he had arrived, Fura Diki recalled. She and Mingma owned 6 yaks, which she used to transport supplies up to Everest Base Camp. 12 days later, Mingma sent a message asking her to bring a load of potatoes. She did, but Mingma wasn't there when she arrived. He was in the icefall. After delivering the potatoes, she took the yaks down to the small settlement of Gorak Shep at 5,164 meters. On the way down, I got a call from my husband, she said. I told him to be careful. It's something I never used to tell him at all. He told me to be careful instead, because one of our yaks, when tired, sometimes headbutts people. He told me there was only 1 day's work left and to bring Chang next time. Fura Diki stayed in Gorak Shep with her yaks that night, descending to Dingboche the following day. She rested the yaks, fed them, and helped prepare a potato field with a friend. In 2 days, she would head back up to base camp with Chang for her husband, who would then be finished with his icefall work. I had a terrible nightmare that night, Fura Diki said. I was climbing Ama de Blam and a black snake was chasing me. I turned back and that's when it attacked me. I begged the snake to leave me, but suddenly it stood huge in front of me. I bowed 3 times and asked for forgiveness for all the wrongs I had done so far. It let me go. I woke in a panic. She lit incense, did puja, and prayed. At 4 p.m., her brother called. Fura Diki, go to the hospital. Go to the helipad. Go now. Something has happened with your husband. He's had an accident in a crevasse. Mingma was cremated in Dingboche in April 2013. After the puja ceremony ended, I vowed to never return, Fura Diki said. I don't like that village. I endured hardship since I was little. It became difficult to live there. When I'm there, I see my husband's belongings. I see places we visited, and it hurts me, she said, brushing tears from her face. Within the span of 46 days, she had lost both her father and her husband. Fura Diki, born in Dingboche, the eldest of 6 children. The closest school was 5 hours walk away in Kumjung. My parents weren't educated and they didn't know the importance of being educated, she said. My task, being the eldest, was to help with the housework. Since my mother kept having children every year, I looked after the house, and because of that, I did not go to school at all. At the age of 19, she married. I had my first daughter at 21, and all 3 daughters before I turned 30, she said. My mind wasn't mature at that age. I felt like a child with children. Mingma, her husband, worked as a carpenter, but Furadiki's father was convinced he couldn't make a good living in that field, so he brought him into the icefall doctor fold, and they worked together in the icefall for 8 years. After the puja for Mingma, Furadiki returned to Kathmandu to be with her 2 youngest daughters. The 3rd daughter was studying in the United States. Her emotional life in tatters, her financial situation began to unravel as well. When I think about it now, I have lost my mind, she said. I didn't have an income. I didn't have any skills. After a year of struggling, she placed her 2 younger daughters for adoption. It seemed the best solution for their future. For about 8 or 9 months after my daughters left, I wandered around aimlessly. Whenever I was alone at home, I would have negative thoughts, like consuming rat poison or hanging myself. A cousin kept an eye on her and tried to keep her safe. Eventually, her aunt offered her work as a cook at a lodge in the village of Fort Say. Back up in the Khumbu Valley, she began to return emotionally to the land of the living, meeting people, getting to know trekking guides, and working through her grief. She became close friends with 2 other young Everest widows, both named Nima Doma Sherpa. One husband had died within 16 days of Furadiki's husband. The other was buried in the avalanche near base camp in 2014. One day, over a cup of tea, the widows joked about climbing Everest. Crazy, impossible idea. But Furadiki wasn't joking. Shortly after, she was invited to a family dinner that famous Everest guide Ang Sering Lama was attending. I considered him a brother created by God, Furadiki said. She told him about what had happened to her father and her husband. So, what are you doing now with your life? He asked. Nothing. I'm not doing anything. I have no skills, and I have no education. Well, what do you want to do? I want to climb Everest. Can you help me? Sure, I can help you, but you have to prepare yourself. And more important, you have to commit to giving back to your community once you climb it. He advised Furadiki and Nima Doma on how to get fit, and he enrolled them at the Khumbu Climbing Center in Fort Say to learn some basic climbing skills. He even paid their way. After KCC, we did a 6,000 meter peak, Ansering said. Their skills weren't great, but they live at high altitude, so they had no problems with that. At the end of March in 2019, we left for the Khumbu, and we climbed it. Can I just quickly add that she has since become a trekking guide, and she's training hard to become a climbing guide.
Keep the mic there, because this is a perfect segue into my next question. Some of the stories of the widows are just heartbreaking in the book, but there are also rays of hope. You do talk about how, and you've just read us a piece of that, but how else are the lives of women in the region changing? What are you seeing there in terms of opportunity and change?
Well, what I'm seeing is that people like Furadiki and actually others who are much more famous than, Furadiki is not famous outside of Nepal at all. But people who are attaining some, fame and success are actually taking on the role of mentoring young women, not all widows, of course, but mentoring young women to learn climbing skills, but also leadership skills. So they're starting to pay forward.
Yeah, which is wonderful to
Is
see.
what has to happen.
Sharon, you were the only woman on your climbing team. Jane was an essential team member for sure. And there was a lot of publicity at the time whether it was going to be you or Annie from the American team who were going to actually manage to get up there. How have things changed for women, both in terms of professional guiding opportunities, but also on big mountain expeditions in the years since your climb?
Well, I think in general, climbing has become a lot more accessible sport than it was in the past. I don't know, I don't know, I mean, I think women are doing some amazing things in our own community, focusing on more on 7,000 meter peaks or on more difficult, technically challenging climbs than the brand name climbs, which is admirable. And yeah, so I think I would say things have changed for the better. I think also though that women are a little I shouldn't make this generalization, but a little smarter when it comes to risk. They don't have as high of a risk tolerance, I think, as some men do. That's a terrible generalization, isn't it?
Well, it was a terrible question in some ways. You know, I mean, it set you up there for.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I mean, we can't deny that there are differences, and to see that evolution over time is interesting. It's heartening. But I don't think you're wrong with that observation about risk tolerance. Yeah. Bernadette, you share, we're almost over, you can relax very soon, leave me off the hot seat. You share so many stories in here, and really, it's packed full of them. Some of them are heartbreaking, some inspiring. Other than the Ali story that you've already shared, was there one in particular that really stuck with you or really moved you or made a bigger impact than others?
Well, part of this story isn't actually in the book, but it did make I think it's a good story. One of the women from Nepal that I interviewed was Lakpa Sherpa. Lakpa has climbed Everest 10 times. She was working at Whole Foods at the time in the United States. She was a single mother, 2 daughters. She was a survivor of an abusive relationship. She still went back to Nepal most years to work on the mountain, and yet she couldn't even afford to have a car, and she was completely illiterate. Like Firadiki, she had never gone to school, she had never learned to write, she basically was illiterate. And so her daughters sort of helped her get through the days, from a technological perspective, but she could work at Whole Foods, and that's how they lived. And I remember writing in my book that it was so incredibly unfair that this woman who had climbed Everest 10 times wasn't being rewarded really in any way. She wasn't famous. Well, she was a little bit famous, but she wasn't rewarded financially. She didn't have sponsors. She didn't have, she wasn't a North Face athlete or anything like that. She was still working at Whole Foods. And I wrote, she would have had, because she was illiterate and she came from a certain generation, she would have needed a fairy godmother to make life different for her. Well, lo and behold, after the book was published, a fairy godmother arrived. And that was a British filmmaker, Lucy Walker, who, I don't even know how Lucy knew about her, but anyway, she did. And she made a film about her, and it's on Netflix, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, Mountain Queen. And Lakpa Sherpa is a real character. I had the privilege of meeting her in Telluride last year, And she's just great. And you know, now she's traveling around the world, you know, introducing her film. And I don't know the financial arrangements, but I hope some of that money slides her way.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. We do need some light and good news in this evening. Listen, neither of you strike me really as the rocking chair, rest on your laurels types. You both throw yourselves into projects and always have. You are an accomplished musician, which is something I hadn't realized, concert level pianist. I wish we had a piano here for you to play for us. You know, heading up the Mountain Film Festival, now running a vineyard, and of course...
That's my husband.
Aha! Well, I can't imagine you're sitting by watching him do all the work somehow. That does not seem like that's what's happening. And of course, you have so many accolades and accomplishments as well. Everest, yes, but speaking, your family, two beautiful young men, your work as a mountain guide. As you both, and actually founder of a mountain community school, that was no small accomplishment either, and now author, of course. For both of you, as you now look forward into this next chapter of your life, what's the most important thing that you want to get done next? Let's start with you.
Start with who?
You.
You.
There you go.
We're a team.
That's kind of like passing me the sharp end, Bernadette.
I do that too.
Yeah, you do that too. I would say that I've never been a goal-focused person at all, really. I've been a more process-oriented person. It's true.
No,
Oh, I thought you said. And I would say the most important thing to me are my relationships with people in my life, and looking after my new family, which is living right next door in the same house. And what am I doing next? That's what your question was. What's next?
What's most important for you? What's your priority going forward? So you, I
Yeah.
think, have just answered
Yeah,
that.
my relationships, quality experiences with friends and family, I'd say.
Okay.
And finding something creative to do. I love being creative.
Perfect. Good.
What she said. No, really. Kind of the same, really. I mean, except for the new member of the family. I don't have any new members of my family, but yeah, I want to spend quality time with the people I care about. Obviously, my family, my aging mom, who is 94. Every day that I spend with her is a special day. And Alan and my friends, and doing things that interest me, and yes, being creative, not in the same way as writing another book, but just being creative, getting back to the piano and practicing a little more.
Oh, nice. Now, you said not in the same way. Does this mean you're done writing? Are you retiring? Or have you got another book project?
No, I'm not. I haven't finished writing. I'm working on a couple of things right now, but this is my last book, yeah.
Interesting.
We'll see, eh?
Yeah, we'll see, right. All right, we're going to do a speed round here, so just pass the mic back and forth. Same question for each of you. Hardest part of writing this book?
First draft.
Okay.
What she said.
Oh, this is going to be really speedy. What was the most rewarding part of writing this book?
Honestly, it was finding my two partners, Saklan in Pakistan and Sarina in Nepal. I couldn't have done it without you guys.
I just want to answer a little more
Go
for
ahead.
Bernadette. I think that it's pretty world-changing too. I think it's going to have big ramifications. That must be fulfilling. The most rewarding part of writing this book was the process, was learning how to write, and it almost felt like, please forgive me, this is my husband Garrett over here, that I had this affair with writing, and I would sneak away or go away for days on end and just write. And I loved being in that zone. It was as good as climbing.
Oh, all right, so given it was such a positive experience, you mentioned creative project, do you have another book in you?
I do not have another book in me. No, I don't see myself as a writer really, but I am somewhat creative, and I do like being in that state.
Is there anything about that book that you wish you could have added or changed?
Well, I wouldn't have minded changing the endings for some of the characters, but it's nonfiction, so I didn't have that opportunity.
Same question.
Anything I would have added or changed? Well, I think you can always be a better writer and tell the story in a better way, but I gave up on that a long time ago. So, I don't think so.
Oh, shit.
What?
You worked so hard.
I did work
and it
hard.
showed. I
And
did
thank
so
you.
well.
Thank you very much. I think we're just gonna have a conversation.
Yeah, I don't want us.
You should each answer for each other, you tell me what. So, final couple of questions here. What do you want people to take away from your book?
What I want to people to take away from this book, I think, is that you don't just pull something off the shelf and make it happen. I think that our process towards any goal needs to be quite organic. And yeah, there's 10,000 hours that goes into it, but I have to say, or I believe that it's really important to love the craft.
Okay.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Does not apply to us. The question, what would you like people to take away from your book?
Aha, right.
Well, I think one of the things that would be good to take away is just the realization that behind any big accomplishment, there's a backstory and there's a B team that is helping to make it happen. And I mean, that applies to everything, not just climbing. But in this case, in the stories in this book, a lot of that B team, a lot of that backstory had to do with local climbers. So maybe it's just thinking about, the support team and how important they are.
You can keep the mic, and one last question here, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Both of you in these books, very different types of books, different projects, but they were big, ambitious projects, complicated, involving many people, not just yourselves. Even yours involves a whole cast of characters. For anyone in the audience here, and I suspect there's at least one who has a big idea for a book, any advice for getting across the finish line?
Well, you have to start. Honestly, I think that's the hardest part. The first draft. No, you just have to start. And actually, if you tell somebody what you're doing, it helps make the commitment.
Yeah, I would agree that first shitty draft and facing the music, giving it, I think finding readers to start reading your stuff transforms your writing. All of a sudden, someone else is reading it out of your head, and it's super scary, and it's a really good thing to get used to.
Do either of you belong to a writing group?
No, I mean, I did briefly, but not on this book. It was an earlier book.
Sorry.
No.
Sharon.
Yes, I belong to a writing group that who I'm very grateful to, and I had a lot of readers as well.
All right. In the interest of time, let's open it up here for a few questions before we snack, buy books, get signatures, all that good stuff. So any questions here from the audience? Yes?
Bernadette, I look forward to reading your book, and I hope my question doesn't spoil it, but can you point to, share with us an incident or an individual who was influential in the transition that you discuss among the Pakistani and Nepali climbers?
Did you all hear the question okay back there?
Wondering if there is an individual who was responsible for or had a big influence on this transition from the way it was in the early 1900s to now. Yes, let me just think which one I would highlight. Pertemba Sherpa, perhaps. He climbed with Chris Bonington on the Everest 1975 expedition, and I think he was one of the early climbing Sherpas who was well trained and educated enough that he could express himself to Chris and make demands. And his demand was that he get to climb on the southwest face, not just, put in camps and whatnot. And he wanted to have a chance at the summit, and he did get the summit. I think that relationship was sort of a forerunner of some of the more partnership relationships that existed in the days to come between Westerners and local climbers.
Thank you. Other questions?
That just means you were a really good question asker.
Warn everybody out. All right. For those who have friends and family out in Vancouver, Bernadette is going to be speaking February 24th, Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival. Please spread the word. The next Fireside Chat is going to be here April 29th. Please mark your calendars. We're still finalizing the last speaker of the three that will be speaking that evening. But the series has been terrific, thanks to these wonderful authors who will come here and spend their time with us. At the back of the room, we have a book sharing table for future reference. All of these events, we have them. Bring a book to take home to share that you've read, or pick one up on the table and take it away with you. We don't want to see anything left on that table at the end. Likewise with the food. So have a snack, have a mingle, and likewise with the books up here at the front from Cafe Books. So please, if you don't already have your coffees, come up, grab a coffee. We're going to hang around for a little bit. Thank you so much, and thank you to both of you for being wonderful guests.